Nathan Silverman's life was the definition of success. At 38, he had built a logistics empire from scratch, expanding it into one of the most profitable companies in the industry. His Manhattan penthouse, perched high above the chaos of the city, was a testament to his achievements. Nathan thrived in the fast-paced world of business. His days were packed with meetings, negotiations, and the constant pressure to stay ahead. But he loved it. He was a man who thrived on challenges, someone who believed that ambition was the key to fulfillment. For Nathan, his success wasn't just about money, it was proof of his ability to outwork and outsmart anyone. He carried himself with confidence, charming his way through boardrooms and social events alike. Samuel Silverman's life was a world apart from his brother's. At 30, he lived with his wife, Emma, in a modest apartment in Queens. The space was small, furnished with practicality rather than luxury, but it was filled with warmth. Framed photos of their wedding hung on the walls, and Emma's touch was evident in the cozy details, a handmade quilt on the couch, flowers in a vase on the kitchen table. Samuel worked as a warehouse manager for his brother at Silverman Logistics. It was steady work, and he took pride in his role, ensuring operations ran smoothly. But his job came with an unspoken weight, it was part of Nathan's empire. While Samuel appreciated the stability it provided, he couldn't ignore the feeling of being just another cog in Nathan's grand machine. His life with Emma was simple but fulfilling. They often cooked meals together, took walks in the park, and dreamed about one day owning a house. Emma was Samuel's anchor, always reminding him of the value of their life together. "What we have is real," she'd say when he compared himself to Nathan. "You don't need to compete with him." But the comparisons were impossible to escape. Nathan's visits to Queens, though well-intentioned, often felt like inspections. He would offer advice, sometimes unprompted, about how Samuel could do more with his life. Meanwhile, Samuel's visits to Nathan's penthouse were overwhelming. The luxury, the confidence Nathan exuded, it all made Samuel feel small. Nathan Silverman wasn't used to wanting something he couldn't have. In his world, desire was followed by acquisition, whether it was a lucrative business deal, a rare piece of art, or a luxury car. So when he found himself drawn to Emma, Samuel's wife, the feeling was both intoxicating and infuriating. It started innocently enough. Nathan had always admired Emma's warmth and kindness, qualities that felt rare in his fast-paced, high-stakes world. Unlike the polished, transactional people he often encountered, Emma's sincerity was disarming. She listened intently when he spoke, even if the conversation revolved around things she had little interest in. Her laughter, soft and genuine, lingered in his mind long after their visits ended. At first, Nathan dismissed his feelings as harmless admiration. But over time, his thoughts of Emma became more intrusive. He began to notice the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her students, the gentle way she teased Samuel to lighten his mood, and the quiet strength she carried in her unassuming life. To Nathan, she was a stark contrast to the shallow relationships that filled his world. She wasn't just beautiful, she was real. The turning point came during one of their visits to his penthouse. Emma went out onto the balcony to admire the view, and Nathan felt himself drawn to her presence. As they stood side by side, the city sprawling below them, Nathan broke the silence. "You know, Samuel's lucky to have you," he said, his voice soft but deliberate. Emma smiled politely. "That's sweet of you to say, Nathan." "I mean it," he continued, his tone shifting. "You're incredible. I've never met anyone like you." Emma glanced at him, her smile fading slightly. "Nathan, that's kind, but—" "I'm not just saying it to be kind," Nathan interrupted, stepping closer. "I feel. I don't know. There's something about you, Emma. I can't stop thinking about it." Emma's expression hardened. "Nathan, stop. Whatever you're thinking, it's not appropriate. I'm Samuel's wife." Her words should have been enough to deter him, but they weren't. If anything, her rejection only fueled his obsession. Nathan wasn't used to hearing no, and he convinced himself that Emma's loyalty to Samuel was misplaced. He believed he could offer her so much more, a life of luxury, excitement, and opportunities Samuel could never provide. Over the following weeks, Nathan found subtle ways to insert himself into Emma's life. He would call Samuel with work updates, making sure Emma was in the background so he could hear her voice. He invited them to dinners and events, using every opportunity to charm her, to show her the kind of life she could have if she chose him. Emma, for her part, grew increasingly uncomfortable. She avoided being alone with Nathan and brushed off his advances whenever they came too close to crossing a line. But she didn't tell Samuel. She couldn't bear to put a wedge between the brothers, especially knowing how much Samuel already struggled with their dynamic. Nathan's obsession, however, wasn't something he could easily contain. The more Emma resisted, the more determined he became. In his mind, this wasn't betrayal, it was destiny. He convinced himself that he was rescuing Emma from a life of mediocrity, that her rejection was only temporary. Nathan wasn't just infatuated, he was consumed, and it was only a matter of time before his fixation spiraled into action. Nathan showed up at Samuel and Emma's apartment unannounced one afternoon, claiming he needed to talk about warehouse issues. Emma was surprised to see him standing at their door, dressed sharply as always, his smile disarming but slightly too forced. Samuel was at work, leaving Emma alone. She hesitated for a moment before letting him in. "Nathan, you should have called," she said, stepping aside. "Sam's not here." "That's fine," Nathan replied smoothly, walking in as though he owned the place. "This won't take long. Actually, I was hoping to talk to you." Emma's stomach tightened. She had tried to brush off Nathan's earlier advances, chalking them up to miscommunication or fleeting lapses in judgment. But now, standing in her modest living room, she felt the air shift. "What do you need to talk about?" she asked, crossing her arms. Nathan sat down on the couch, his posture relaxed, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made Emma uneasy. "Emma, I know you've been avoiding me," he said. "And I get it, you're uncomfortable. But I think you're misunderstanding me." "There's nothing to misunderstand, Nathan," Emma replied, her voice steady but firm. "I've been clear. Whatever you think this is, it's not going to happen. I love Samuel." Nathan's expression darkened. "I'm not asking you to leave Samuel. I'm saying you deserve more. I can give you that." Emma shook her head, taking a step back. "You need to go." But Nathan didn't move. Instead, he stood, closing the distance between them. "Emma," he said softly, his tone almost pleading, "you don't have to settle for this. For him." She froze as his hand reached out to touch her arm. "Don't," she said, her voice rising. "Nathan, I'm serious. Leave." Something shifted in Nathan's face, his charm evaporated, replaced by something colder, more determined. Before Emma could react, he grabbed her wrist, his grip firm. She struggled, panic rising as he pushed her against the wall. "You think you can ignore me?" he hissed, his voice low but dangerous. "Do you know who I am? What I've done for you and Samuel? Let go of me." Emma shouted, but her voice cracked under the weight of her fear. Nathan's strength overpowered her attempts to fight back. The encounter was brief but devastating, leaving Emma shaking and gasping for breath when it was over. Nathan stepped back, smoothing his suit as if nothing had happened. His calmness was almost as terrifying as the assault itself. "You tell Samuel about this," he said, his voice now eerily composed, "and I'll make sure he loses everything. His job, his reputation, gone. Do you think he can survive without me? Do you want to see him destroyed?" Emma stared at him, tears streaming down her face, her voice caught in her throat. Nathan walked toward the door, pausing as he opened it. "Think carefully, Emma. I don't want to hurt you, or him. But some things are better left unsaid. The door closed behind him, leaving Emma alone in the silence of their apartment. She sank to the floor, her body trembling, her mind racing with fear and anger. She wanted to scream, to call Samuel, to tell him everything. But Nathan's threat loomed large. Without Samuel's job, how would they survive? How could she burden her husband with something so awful, knowing it might destroy him? In the days that followed, Emma withdrew into herself. She avoided Nathan entirely, refusing to attend gatherings or answer his calls. She smiled less, her laughter now a shadow of what it had been. Samuel noticed the change but attributed it to stress. "You've been working too hard," he said one evening, pulling her close. "Take a break." Emma wanted to tell him, to let him hold her pain, but every time she opened her mouth, Nathan's words echoed in her mind. The threat wasn't just to Samuel's career, it was to their entire life. She couldn't risk it, no matter how much it hurt to keep the secret. Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands, trembling from the weight of the decision she'd finally made. Days had turned into weeks since Nathan's assault, and the burden of her silence was eating away at her. Every time she looked at Samuel, the guilt and pain threatened to spill over. She couldn't live like this anymore. She had to tell him the truth. She rehearsed the conversation in her head 100 times. She would explain what happened, how Nathan had crossed the line, how he'd threatened their future. Samuel deserved to know. Keeping it a secret felt like a betrayal of their marriage, and Emma couldn't let Nathan's power over them continue. That evening, as Samuel walked through the door, Emma steeled herself. She stood up, her palms damp with sweat, and greeted him. "Hey," she said, her voice shakier than she'd intended. "Can we talk? It's important." But before she could continue, Samuel beamed at her, holding up a bottle of wine. "Not yet," he said, grinning. "I've got some news of my own, and you're going to want to celebrate." Emma froze, her practiced words vanishing. "News?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel set the wine down and pulled her into a hug. "Nathan gave me a raise," he announced, his excitement bubbling over. "Not just a small one, either. A big bump, enough for us to finally start saving for a house." Emma's heart sank. She felt his arms tighten around her, his joy radiating from every word, and she wanted to scream. The room seemed to tilt around her as Samuel continued talking, his voice full of hope. "You know, I've been feeling stuck for so long, like I'll never get out of the warehouse," he said, pulling back to look her in the eyes. "But this changes everything. I feel like I'm finally moving forward, Em. We're moving forward." She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she heard herself say, "That's amazing, Sam. You deserve it." Samuel poured the wine, talking animatedly about the raise and what it could mean for their future. "We'll finally have enough to start house hunting," he said, raising his glass. "To us." Emma clinked her glass against his, barely managing to keep her hand steady. She took a sip, her throat tightening as the guilt consumed her. The resolve she'd felt earlier that day, the courage she'd spent so long building, was gone. Samuel's joy was a fragile thing, and she couldn't bear to be the one to break it. That night, after Samuel had fallen asleep, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She replayed his excitement in her mind, the way he'd smiled, the hope in his voice. She couldn't destroy that, not when he'd been struggling for so long to find his footing. But keeping the truth inside felt like a betrayal of herself, of the pain and fear she'd been carrying alone. Nathan's threat echoed in her mind, cold and calculated, "I'll ruin him." It wasn't just a financial ruin Nathan had promised, it was the destruction of everything Samuel had worked for, everything they'd built together. Telling the truth would mean shattering Samuel's relationship with his brother, unraveling the fragile sense of progress that had brought him so much happiness. By morning, Emma had made her choice. She would keep the secret, for now. It wasn't the right decision, but it felt like the only one. She told herself she was protecting Samuel, shielding him from a truth that would only bring pain. But deep down, she knew the truth was more complicated. Nathan's actions had trapped her in a web of silence, and every day she stayed quiet, the threads tightened. Samuel had been restless all evening. Something about Emma's recent behavior didn't sit right with him, her withdrawn demeanor, her quiet tension whenever Nathan's name came up. He'd chalked it up to stress or perhaps one of those subtle, inexplicable shifts that sometimes happened in marriage. But when Emma's phone buzzed incessantly on the counter while she was in the shower, he felt a pang of unease he couldn't ignore. At first, he resisted the urge to look. He trusted Emma. But the buzzing continued, each vibration pulling at his already frayed nerves. Finally, he walked over, glancing at the screen. The message was from Nathan. The screen revealed a preview of the latest message, asterisk, "I can't forget you, baby, maybe we can do that night again." Asterisk. The word struck Samuel like a physical blow. His chest tightened as disbelief flooded through him. He unlocked the phone with trembling fingers, scrolling up to see the rest of the conversation. Each message deepened the pit in his stomach. Nathan's earlier texts painted a sickening picture of entitlement and manipulation. Asterisk, "I know you're angry, but I can't stop thinking about you. That night wasn't a mistake for me. Asterisk. Asterisk, you're everything I've ever wanted, Emma. Why can't you see that? Asterisk. Asterisk, we could be so good together if you just stop fighting it. Asterisk." The phone slipped from his hand onto the counter as he stared at it, his mind a whirlwind of fury and disbelief. He replayed the last few weeks in his head, Emma's withdrawn behavior, her nervous energy whenever Nathan's name came up. It all made sense now, and the realization twisted the knife even deeper. When Emma walked out of the bathroom, her damp hair falling over her shoulders, she immediately noticed Samuel's expression. His face was flushed, his eyes burning with anger. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping closer. Samuel didn't say a word at first. He picked up her phone, holding it up as if it were evidence in a trial. His voice, low and deadly, finally broke the silence. "Explain this," he demanded, his tone cold enough to make her freeze. Emma's eyes darted to the phone, and her face went pale. "Samuel," she began, her voice shaky. "I can." "Don't," he snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare say you can explain. What the hell is this? What is Nathan talking about? That night? Baby? What the hell happened?" Tears filled Emma's eyes, but Samuel's fury was unrelenting. "You've been hiding this from me," he continued, his voice rising. "For weeks, you've been lying to me. Letting me believe everything was fine while this was happening behind my back." "It's not what you think," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I didn't want." "Oh, so now you're the victim?" Samuel snapped, his bitterness cutting through her words. "Nathan doesn't just write things like this out of nowhere, Emma. Something happened. Something you didn't tell me." Emma's tears spilled over as she struggled to speak. The truth was there, clawing its way out of her throat, but Nathan's threats echoed in her mind, paralyzing her. She shook her head, unable to form a coherent response. "It wasn't my fault," Emma whispered, her words barely audible. Samuel laughed bitterly. "Not your fault? Then whose fault is it, Emma? Because Nathan seems pretty sure of what he wants, and you," he stopped himself, the anger giving way to an unbearable sense of betrayal. "You let this happen." Emma sobbed, but Samuel couldn't see past his rage. He grabbed a bag from their closet and tossed it at her feet. "Get out," he said coldly. "Go be with Nathan if that's what you want. I can't even look at you right now." Emma's world crumbled as she stared at Samuel, her heart breaking under the weight of his words. "Samuel, please," she whispered, but he turned away, his body rigid with anger. The door slammed shut behind her as she left, her sobs echoing in the empty hallway. Samuel stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone still sitting on the counter. The messages burned into his mind, each one another dagger to his already broken heart. Emma didn't even know where to go, so the only person who could help her right now was Clara, her work colleague and best friend. Emma sat in Clara's kitchen, her hands trembling as she clutched a steaming mug of tea. Tears streamed down her face, her voice shaking as she recounted the nightmare she had been living. Clara sat across from her, her expression a mix of anger and sorrow. She had never seen Emma like this, so broken, so consumed by fear. "I didn't know what to do," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "Nathan said he'd ruin Samuel if I told him. And now, Samuel hates me. He thinks I betrayed him." Clara reached across the table and took Emma's hands in hers. "You did nothing wrong, Emma. This isn't your fault. Nathan manipulated you, hurt you. Samuel needs to know the truth." Emma shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. "I tried. I wanted to tell him, but he was so angry, Clara. And now, after what happened tonight, I don't think he'll ever listen to me." Clara's jaw tightened, her resolve hardening. "He'll listen to me," she said firmly. "Nathan doesn't get to walk away from this. He's destroyed too much already. I'll make Samuel understand." Emma looked up at her friend, a glimmer of hope breaking through the despair. "You think he'll believe me?" Clara squeezed her hands. "He will. And if he doesn't, I'll make him. You're not alone in this, Emma. Not anymore." The next morning, Clara tracked Samuel down at his apartment. He looked disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, his anger from the night before simmering beneath the surface. He barely had time to greet her before Clara stormed in and slapped him across the cheek, the sound echoing in the small living room. "Clara, what the hell," he started, but she cut him off. "Shut up, Samuel," she snapped, her eyes blazing. "You're going to listen to me, and you're not going to say a damn word until I'm finished." Samuel froze, stunned by the force of her words. "You've spent the last day blaming Emma for something that wasn't her fault," Clara began, her voice trembling with anger. "You don't even know what she's been through. Nathan, your brother, assaulted her, Samuel. He hurt her, and then he threatened her to keep quiet. She's been living in fear, trying to protect you, while you've been too blind to see what's really going on." Samuel's face paled, his breath catching in his throat. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. "I'm talking about the fact that Nathan is a monster," Clara said. "And instead of supporting Emma, you threw her out. You let Nathan's lies drive a wedge between you." Samuel sank onto the couch, Clara's words sinking in like daggers. He thought back to the messages, to Emma's tears, to the way she had tried to speak but couldn't. Guilt washed over him in waves, suffocating and relentless. Fueled by guilt and rage, Samuel went to Nathan's penthouse. The door swung open to reveal his older brother, casually dressed and sipping coffee as if nothing were wrong. Nathan's smirk faded when he saw the fury in Samuel's eyes. "We need to talk," Samuel said, pushing past him into the penthouse. Nathan sighed, setting his coffee down. "I'm guessing this is about Emma." Samuel whirled around, his fists clenched. "You assaulted her. You threatened her. And then you tried to make her feel like it was her fault. How could you do that, Nathan? She's my wife." Nathan's face hardened. "I didn't do anything she didn't want." Samuel lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar. "Don't you dare lie to me," he shouted. "You've been manipulating her, using your power to control her. You destroyed everything, Nathan." Nathan shoved Samuel off him, his composure slipping. "You don't understand how complicated things are," he said, his voice rising. "I gave you everything, Samuel. I made your life what it is. And now you're turning on me? Everything you've given me means nothing now," Samuel spat. "You're a monster, Nathan. And you're going to pay for what you did." Their argument escalated, voices echoing through the penthouse. When the fight turned physical, the two brothers ended up on the balcony. In the heat of their struggle, Samuel lost his footing. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Nathan's eyes widened as Samuel teetered on the edge before falling, his scream cut short as he plummeted to the street below. Nathan stood frozen, staring down at the street in horror. The reality of what had just happened hit him like a freight train. He staggered back into the penthouse, his mind racing. The police arrived at Nathan's penthouse within minutes of Samuel's fall. Nathan, shaken and defensive, insisted it wasn't his fault. "He came here angry, accusing me of lies," Nathan told the officers. "He attacked me first. He slipped, it was an accident." However, the neighbors had reported hearing a heated argument moments before the fall, and Nathan's account didn't align with their statements. The officers pressed for more details, their suspicion growing. That evening, Emma and Clara arrived at the precinct. Emma, pale and trembling, recounted everything: the assault, Nathan's threats, and the relentless harassment. "He raped me," she admitted through tears. "He threatened to destroy Samuel if I told anyone. Samuel went to confront him because of what Nathan did." Emma presented Nathan's text messages, which corroborated her story. The evidence painted a clear picture of Nathan's manipulation and guilt. When confronted with Emma's testimony in the messages, Nathan's confidence faltered. "She's lying," he claimed. "I never hurt her. She led me on." But the evidence and witness reports were overwhelming. Nathan was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter for Samuel's death and aggravated assault. Months later, Nathan was convicted. Though justice was served, the damage couldn't be undone. Emma, grieving and haunted, began to rebuild her life. One day, after noticing strange symptoms, she took a test. When 2 lines appeared, the reality hit her: she was pregnant. The child, conceived through violence, was a painful reminder of Nathan's actions. Yet as Emma placed a hand on her stomach, she whispered, "We'll be okay. I promise." It was a vow to create a life of hope, resilience, and healing amidst the destruction.